Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. Last couple days have been stuck in front of my computer, a little bit, compiling the first show of my other show, America's Missing Podcast, uploading it to YouTube. Because we have two versions of the show. We have just the MP3 version, which is on iTunes and at Podomatic.com, of course, where you can also find this show. But then we have a YouTube show, which is the MP3 file mixed with pictures that we use of whoever the missing person is for that week and any information that we can put on the screen at YouTube that might be helpful. And that takes a little bit more work on my part, and when you're done, the file is huge. The MP3 file, I think, for our show is about what this show is. It's like around 26 to 30 megabytes, something like this, something like that. But when you turn that show into a MP4 file with pictures and everything, it became 3.08 gigabytes. So, it took a while to compile by my Mac in iMovie, and then it took a while, as you can imagine, to upload it to YouTube. So, and I had to kind of shepherd that along to make sure it didn't stop or didn't cancel or there were no problems. But it's done, and it's up there, and I suggest you check it out. Just do a search for America's Missing Podcast, The Disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. Like I said, we are now at YouTube and Podomatic and iTunes. You can check that out. In addition to this show, which isn't going anywhere, I take as great a pride in this show as anything I do in my life. So I'm not going anywhere with my politics here, but no politics are talked about on the Missing Person podcast because it's just not the right thing to do. That's about families and people missing and maybe crimes involved. That's what that show's about. And this show is about politics. So I urge you to check that out. America's Missing Podcast. New show by me and my partner, Melissa Bridges. I got to see, finally, Batman vs. Superman while I was waiting for this show, for my other show, to compile, and I found Batman vs. Superman online. I can't believe they went in that direction with Batman after the Christopher Nolan movies were so successful. And I thought in fact, most people thought that he captured the essence of Batman perfectly. That franchise has definitely taken a step back. And it's not even necessarily a problem. I had a problem with Ben Affleck. It was just the entire story and versus Superman and the tone of the movie. It was just less realistic. That was the thing about the Christopher Nolan movies. You could see that stuff happening in real life. Not so sure about Batman versus Superman, The Dawn of Justice, or whatever it was called. So it definitely took a step back. It was a little long, a little slow in places. It was definitely not as good as the Civil War, the Captain America movie. Definitely not as good as that. And I don't think it'll be as good as the next X-Men movie either. So there you go. Let's get to the show. It's always interesting for me, as I've told you last week, I went to the Daily Cause website, which is probably one of the most popular liberal websites on the internet ever. And because I go over there, I hadn't been there in a while, and I want to get their perspective. And as I've told you, what amazes me when I go over there is how much they don't really cover the things that are the most popular or the most pressing matters. I've told you this. How many times I've gone there and they don't talk about ISIS. There's no mention of Hillary Clinton even on just huge issues that they'll just ignore to cover some little congressman race in Pennsylvania or something like that. It's weird to me. However, when I do run into something that is what I would say kind of a mirror image, and what I mean by that is, here we are on the right, not me so much, because as you know, I think whether Trump wins or Hillary wins, it's about the same. They're both horrible. But there are many Republicans who have resigned the fact that they're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so they want Trump to win, or they're going to vote for Donald Trump, but they don't want Hillary Clinton to win. But they're fearful that Hillary Clinton might win. And so they come up, and I've come up with many reasons that Hillary Clinton is probably going to win. Well, on the left, the mirror image are a bunch of lefties looking at this election and coming up with all these reasons why Donald Trump can win. And it is fascinating. And I'll tell you the reason it's fascinating. And I'm referencing a story that you can find at the Daily Beast. Was it by Judy Woodruff? I didn't write down who did it, but I found it through redstate.com, but I actually went to the Daily Beast site to read it. And if you can get through a lot of of course, the liberal cliches and everything, at its essence, it's very interesting. And dare I say it, it might even be truthful. And what the writer, and once again, I think it's Judy Woodruff, but I didn't write it down. But it was definitely a woman that wrote it. She's portraying this year's election, which is presumably going to be against Trump, is going to be Trump versus Hillary, like 2012, but flipped, in that Hillary Clinton is actually Mitt Romney and Donald Trump is Barack Obama. That is insightful to me. Now that gets my attention. I know that I poo-poo liberals and I don't like them. I think they're wrong, but I have no problem giving them credit when they come up with something that's interesting and I think is a very good analogy. And the writer for this puts it this way. The reason and the reason that Trump could win over Hillary is this: that Hillary is much like Mitt Romney in that she is promising a little bit of change, but really all we need are some tweaks here and some tweaks there. Not going to get too outside the box, to use a horrible cliche, because that's really what Mitt Romney was offering. Kind of a little bit more of the same. Whereas in 2012, and probably unfortunately to this day, Barack Obama is seen as this kind of outsider who went to Washington and changed things. And a lot of people believe that. In addition, that Mitt Romney, even though he's a rich guy like Donald Trump, they're not the same, because here Trump he has done what people would call tangible things. You could see buildings in Atlantic City and New York City going up and people going to work, construction workers, electricians, plumbers, architects, all of that. You know, these tangible things that some of them even still have Trump's name on them. Of course, a lot of them don't because they went out of business. But Trump's name was out there, and people even not associated with his business knew that there was this people getting in their cars to go and going to work. Whereas Mitt Romney, rich guy, got his money legally, but hard to tell. Some back, in some conference room that you're never going to see, on some computer, some consultant thing, just giving business people, other companies advice. It's something that your average person, it's hard to visualize. Even though each economically were creating jobs and wealth, Trump's is easier to understand for people, and Mitt Romney's, it seems like it's just paperwork. Right? And the writer in this article makes that point, and I think that that is a very good one. I'm not saying that I agree with it, but I think for a lot of people, they do agree with it. And many, even conservatives, probably could agree with that. In the way we think about wealth in this country, it seems that Donald Trump is more, quote unquote, legitimate than Mitt Romney is, even though economically, by economic standards, by free trade, free market, capitalistic standards, they are both legitimate businessmen, even though we know that Donald Trump has probably benefited a little bit too much for government intervention, and maybe you could even say that on Mitt Romney's part too. Okay? But you can't equate them because one is seen as bricks and mortar guy and Mitt Romney is seen as backroom deals, paperwork, buying companies and splitting them apart guy. Mm-hmm. One is seen as being better than the other. So that's why that cliche that has been tried to be used between them maybe doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Whereas Hillary Clinton seems to have more in contrast with Mitt Romney, and Donald Trump, being that he's a guy who many see as a guy who's going to go to Washington and tear things up and upset the status quo. When people think of that, they think of Barack Obama. And in that way, I've been telling you for months that Barack Obama and Donald Trump have a lot in common. Not everything in common, but a lot in common. Whereas the truth is, Barack Obama went to Washington, D.C., and nothing's changed. It's just gotten bigger. If the change has happened, it's that government has become even more intrusive, which is more of the status quo, and spending even more money, which is also part of the status quo. And dare I say it, if Donald Trump gets in there, it's more of that is going to happen, despite what people think. And this worries the left. I'm not saying this particular writer dislikes Hillary Clinton. And in fact, I'm sure that this writer, in a contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, this writer is going to go and vote Hillary Clinton probably more than once if she can. But this is the fear that they have on the left, that Hillary Clinton's a little bit too much like Mitt Romney and Donald Trump is a little bit too much like Barack Obama. And we know what happened in that election in 2012. But see, this is the problem that we run into on our side, in that a Mitt Romney, hey, as I've told you, I voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. That was a mistake. I should have started my Never Trump thing with Never Romney. And in fact, I should have started my Never Trump thing with Never McCain. Really. And I'm still doing penance for that and owning up to it. My problem is that not enough other conservatives are doing the same. But see, our chance, given that I think this is right. I think that many people do see Hillary Clinton like Mitt Romney. Now, I don't know if it's as drastic as is stated in this article, but I think the essence of it is true. The difference is, I think, with that the big deal regarding Donald Trump and Barack Obama, why I'm not sure if it totally works out as a good comparison, is because Donald Trump turns off millions and millions and millions of women. Barack Obama doesn't. And that is going to be the main factor, in my opinion, why Donald Trump is not going to get the presidency. I know a lot of women don't like Hillary Clinton too, but it's not, I don't think, as visceral as it is for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has brought that on himself. And in that way, the election this year, despite, I think, this decent comparison, is a contest between probably much more, hated people than Mitt Romney and Barack Obama in 2012. As much as I dislike Barack Obama, the truth is Donald Trump is a poor version of Barack Obama. Likewise, Hillary Clinton is a poor version of Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were much more liked, both of them, than Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton will ever be. If we're just going on likability and favorable, unfavorable ratings. Even though all four of them can't get their politics right, can't get their government policies right. All four of them pretty much are wrong for many different reasons. But this is, as conservatives, if you have a chance to go to that article and read it, this is what drives us nuts. And to once again bring up this conversation I had with this friend of mine this past week. And like I said, you're getting the idea that it was a long, decent back and forth. I was doing most of the talking as I usually do. Because I think he's a much busier guy than I am regarding this. He has kids, he's married, he has things going on. I don't. But I made the point to him, is that it was supposed to be very simple this year for this election for Republicans. Because we suspected a year ago, even though she hadn't, I don't know if she had announced yet at this time, May last year, I'm just not sure about the date, but we knew she was going to run. And when you think about running against Hillary Clinton, what do you think? When we as conservatives, what do we think? We think, well, she got this email issue. She has this Benghazi issue. She has this Clinton Foundation issue. We know she turns off lots of people. She's crooked. Her husband's crooked. A lot of suspicious dealings with them. All we have to do, even if you just want to take the politics, just the issues out, forget about taxes and regulation, if you can just nominate a moral non-crook, you're probably going to do pretty well. Because what is Hillary Clinton at her most basic elements? She's a lying crook. Take her politics out of it. Take her being a wife of a former president. Take her being a mother out of it. Take a grandmother out of it. Take her education out of it. Where she grew up. Being a senator from New York. At the essence, if she had none of those things, it was just Hillary Clinton on her own, she would be known as a lying crook. All our job was this time as Republicans was to nominate, once again, you don't even have to get that conservative. You don't have to necessarily go the Ted Cruz route or the Marco Rubio route. If you could just find somebody amongst all of those guys and the woman Carly Fiorina, if you can find a non-lying, moral, non-crook, you're probably going to do pretty well. It's somebody who can believably get up there and just have this background that can be respected, and you know that when he or she talks, he or she means it. No nefarious dealings, nothing like that. We as Republicans couldn't do that. It was very simple because the truth is most people, although we are all flawed, because we have our deadly sins within us, our ego, our pride, our vanity, gluttony. But most of us are trying to be moral people. We fail, but we do try to be moral people for the most part, most people, because we believe that makes the world a better place. Okay? In fact, you could say that had we just been able to pick an average, moral, non-crook Republican, he or she, just who isn't well-known, just your average person out there, might have had a pretty good chance against Hillary Clinton. Because so many people, as you see in her unfavorable ratings, see her as being shifty, a liar, a crook, everything else. But we couldn't do that. What did we do? We're going to nominate the Republican version of Hillary Clinton, a lying crook. And in that way, the Republican Party, although I'm not a member of it anymore, as I've told you, I'm unaffiliated now. The Republican Party, so I can kind of talk about it. I can't talk about it as we, the Republican Party, because I'm not part of it. I can actually talk about it in the third person. The Republican Party, in that way, is very much like Charlie Brown. All he has to do is make sure, who was it, that Lucy doesn't pull? Was it Lucy? That pulls that pulls the football away. All we had to make sure is that we kicked the football. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. And in that, we're like the Keystone Cops. We're like the gang that couldn't, the Republican Party is like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. The Apple Dumpling Gang, wasn't that a Disney movie with Don Knotts or something like that way back when? In that way, it didn't get much more simpler this time, and people couldn't do it. They wanted, obviously a lot of people wanted their own crook, but with Donald Trump, the lying crook, flip-flopper that he is. But I think, going back to this article from the Daily Beast, I think that this is the reason that happened, is because Donald Trump has, not just that he's been in the news all these years, but as has stated in this article, and maybe redstate.com did a little a blog post about this article as well. It's that people know, the insight is that people know that Donald Trump is a liar, but they love being in on the lie. It's like reality TV. People who watch reality TV, I think down deep, they enjoy it, and they maybe think it's real life, but down deep, maybe they know that it's somewhat scripted and it's just done for drama, but they don't care because they love being part of the story. In addition, the reason that people are drawn to reality TV is because people start thinking, see, you don't need to be talented. You don't need to be polished. You don't need to have any special skills. You can just be famous for being famous. Like Paris Hilton, the Kardashians, and all of those different shows. Which means it gives people hope that your average person can then be famous too, despite not having any special skills, not working for anything, for any sort of speciality in life, any uniqueness, being one of a kind in a certain field. But they love being part of the show. Whereas in contrast, Hillary is also a liar and a faker, but it's different. In the article, the comparison is between the carnival barker who's asking you to come in and see the woman who, through some process, turns into a gorilla. I'm thinking of what was it? Diamonds Are Forever, the James Bond movie. Have you ever seen that scene in the movie? Now, everybody knows that no woman can turn into a gorilla, but people go in and see it anyway. And they don't hold it against the carnival barker that he's lying. Whereas in the article, Hillary Clinton is seen as that liar used car salesman who's telling you that there's this car. I don't think they used the car salesman analogy, but I'm going to use it. The guy who's lying about that car that you want to buy, he's saying that it's perfect, but then you drive it off the lot and it doesn't get a mile down the road. There's a difference. Both the carnival barker and the used car salesman are lying, but people take one less serious than the other. And people want one to actually be telling the truth, but the lying, they don't mind that they're getting lied to by the carnival barker. The carnival barker and the used car salesman are both in the lying business. It's just that people look at the two different. And this is the point that is made in this article, once again, between redstate.com and this article at the Huffington Post. And that's why, or at the Daily Beast. And that's why I keep saying all we had to do was nominate a moral non-liar, non-crook, and we would have been fine. Couldn't do that. Once again, I'm using we. The Republican Party, all they had to do was do that. And in that way, getting back to continue this analogy that is started from this Daily Beast article, is that Barack Obama, what the article is really saying, is that Barack Obama was the carnival barker. Kind of knew, remember he said the oceans would recede, but people didn't mind because they wanted to be part of it. They wanted to be part of the show. They didn't mind being lied to because they know, they kind of maybe suspect it's all part of the act anyway, but dang it, wouldn't it be great if it's true? Whereas with Mitt Romney, and I'm not saying that Mitt Romney was a liar. I don't think he was. No, lying no more than any politician trying to get elected. Let's put it that way. But people saw him, despite his somewhat moral background, as being more like a used car salesman. And then that goes to, we made all this wealth, what, consulting? Pushing a bunch of paper around? To a lot of people, that sounds like a used car salesman. Whereas with Barack Obama, going back to his time before he was president, he was a community organizer out there in the streets of Chicago, visible, known. People knew him. He got to know people. And it wasn't just him sitting at a desk trying to push paper around to get equality in Chicago. No, he was out in the streets. Very interesting. But this is how the left looks at it and why they're fearful that Donald Trump could win for this very phenomenon that I'm talking about. That people prefer the carnival barker over the used car salesman of Hillary Clinton, or that insurance salesman who's trying to sell, as the article I think uses, trying to sell whole life insurance to somebody on welfare, something like that. I think is what the article said. I think the only maybe flaw that's going into this is that, as I stated, looking at the unfavorables, let's put it this way. If Donald Trump was actually a carnival barker for a carnival, given how unfavorably people see him, at least when it comes to elections, that carnival would be out of business. Now, I know his show, The Apprentice, did very well, but all he did was host it and make decisions about who gets to stay and who gets fired. It wasn't necessarily a show about him doing work, even though that's what it seems like, because you get to see him seated in this conference room and his daughters and sons are there. But in the reality in that show, forgive the pun, it was the contestants that were doing the work. Remember that. It were the contestants. Donald Trump's never been in a business contest against other businessmen like those contestants were on Donald Trump's show. And even what we know about Donald Trump, of course, maybe in business against other construction companies, other moguls in New York City or in the Eastern Seaboard, it seems like he likes to cheat quite a bit to get his way. Something that couldn't be done on his show. So there's that. Remember, he wasn't even necessarily the star of the show. He hosted it, had his name on it, but most of the camera time was on everybody else. That's not the same with the Kardashians or the Osbournes. Showing my age there a little bit, going back a few years. I really believe that if Donald Trump was a carnival barker, the carnival would be out of business, despite him having success in show business. Just looking at how unfavorably people view him. And likewise, if Hillary Clinton, being who she is, I don't think she would have been a very good used car salesman or insurance salesman. Once again, because people tend to dislike her very quickly. So it's just fascinating. I wanted to tell you about it. You need to read it for yourself. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I want to move on to something else. And it's funny that I would come across this article at Mediaite, mediaite.com. And this was also part of the conversation that I had this weekend with this friend of mine. If you're getting the idea that this went on for a little while over a decent part of Saturday, you're right. And we covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate this friend of mine in engaging me the way he does, because we're both conservatives, but we do see some issues different ways, and I've told you that he's somewhere in the middle right now. He's definitely not a never-Trumper like myself, and in fact, I would say that he plays a very good devil's advocate for the other side. Let's just put it that way, even though I know he's once again, he's still somewhere in the middle. And truthfully, nobody really has to make up their mind until November. And I realize that. And dare I say it, probably a lot of people's minds are going to change one way, and go the other before November. A decent, not a huge percentage or anything, but people are going to change their minds one way or the other. And people are holding out like this friend of mine. And so he doesn't go along with everything that I say, and we can be fairly honest with each other because we've known each other for so many years. But the issue of Trump's Christianity came up, and it wasn't a long conversation. And I've told this friend of mine, as I've told you, I think that Donald Trump is a bad guy. I think that even to the point of being evil. And the reason I say that is because I've known people like both men and women in my life over the years personally like that. And it was never a show. This is who these people were. If filthy things came out of their mouth, that's kind of who they were. Not necessarily all the time, but that was their default setting. Right? If you, like on your computer, you hit a reset button and it can change all of your settings back to what they were from the factory. Well, if you hit the reset button on these people that I knew that were like that, that's what it would default to. That at one time they were evil people, and maybe they've figured out that that's who they are and they try to cover it, but this way they cover it up that way, but really they don't want to change because they've benefited from it. And they've gotten their way from it because of it. And we all know people like that. We all know that. And that's the way I see Donald Trump. His default is nastiness. And the way I think about, let's say the exact opposite of that. Who would be somebody that would be the exact opposite of that? See, his default is when he feels like he needs to talk about a subject, it automatically becomes vulgar and in the gutter. That must be who he is. It's funny how we know that in our real lives. The people that act like that probably are evil and bad people, but because it's a guy running for office, he's just saying that. That's weird to me. But I'll give you an exact opposite situation of what I mean. And this was not an original idea by me, but this was something that Dennis Miller stated when he was still doing his radio show. And by the way, can I just say, having seen his recent Facebook stuff, somebody needs to get him away from Facebook. I don't know what has happened to that guy. He seems like he's lost it a little bit. I'm just going to say so. And I say that with as much respect as I can. It's just, I think I'm a little over it. I'm a little over his shtick. All right? And maybe that's, and I talked about him a couple weeks ago. But when he was still, I think, had most of his brain and doing his show, this happened, he said this when Robin Williams died, which was what, about 4 years ago, 3 years ago? Forget when, but definitely since I moved to Florida. And he made the point, here was Robin Williams, a comedian, who would just go on these total tangents. Just seemingly stream of conscious, humor, tirades, rants, just go on for minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes. But he never offended anybody. Even though, and I don't think it was planned, that was just part of who Robin Williams was. He had this innate ability, that was his kind of humor. Everybody has their shtick. But his shtick was just looking at things and starting to talk about them. And looking at people and starting to talk about them. And I also know, though, on the other, he was known as ripping off other comedians' jokes. If you don't know that about him, that's true. In any case, his shtick was just going around and talking about things and making people laugh. Everything just coming out of his mouth, but never anything offensive. Why? Well, Dennis Miller would say, and I would agree with Dennis on this. Why? Because Robin Williams didn't have a mean bone in his body. He might have been into drugs, didn't live the cleanest life that we would like, and it seemed that maybe he had fallen back into something towards the end of his life of addiction or something like that. And that sucks. But the default setting for him was a very kind, gentle guy who just wanted to see people laugh. Held no hatred for anybody, loved everybody, and it came out in his humor. Yes, I knew he swore sometimes. Made some X-rated jokes here and there. But at his essence, his default was always kindness and modesty and humbleness. When he went off on all these tangents. With Donald Trump, it is the opposite. Donald Trump is the opposite type of personality from Robin Williams. At least the way we view them. And that's why and that goes through my head, and I haven't used that haven't said this to this friend of mine. Maybe he listened to the show and now I'll know that I meant to tell him that. But that's the difference, and it means something. This isn't just splitting hairs here. Those are big differences in the kind of person people can be. Between the person who automatically resets to vulgarity and the person who always resets to kindness, gentleness, and modesty. That's not a splitting of hairs. And of course, then we have everybody that's in between that. Most people are not Donald Trump, and dare I say it, most people are not Robin Williams. But I thought of this, and I brought this up, and this is why I told this friend of mine months ago that Donald Trump, I believe, is an evil guy. And my friend brought this up to me this weekend, again, saying, I know that you think that Donald Trump is an evil guy. Well, I'm just not there yet. And then my friend continued, he professes his belief in God, and I believe him. And of course, me, because I can say this to this friend of mine, I said back to him, well, you know what? Jim Jones professed God too. And so what goes along with this, the reason I'm talking about this is because I ran into this article, like I said before, at Mediaite.com, Mediaite.com. An evangelical pastor was being interviewed there. And he was being asked about Donald Trump's faith. And we know that over the months since he decided he was going to run for president, he's made a lot of statements about his Christianity and his belief and but when he expounds on it, it certainly sounds like he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. The little cracker, I mean, he talks about it in derogatory terms. Once again, that default setting. His default is derogatory. And Corinthians 2, or whatever he said with that, everything, anytime you scratch the surface with it, you find out it's like a Hollywood set. You open the front door, walk through the doorway, and you're in the backyard. There's nothing. It's just a facade. There's nothing there. So what does this pastor say? I don't know this guy. Probably will never meet him. I don't know what kind of person he is. I don't know what kind of church he runs. Nothing. But you know what this guy said? He said, I believe that Donald Trump is a very true Christian man. This is me paraphrasing. Because when he talks, his hand is always pointed toward the sky. And that's an indication to me that he always has God on his mind. Just from the pointing. And he says, just like athletes, when they score a touchdown, they kneel down and they point to the sky. That's all Donald Trump is doing here. That's enough for an evangelical pastor to think that Donald Trump is a very, very good Christian. A pointing. And unfortunately, just like this friend of mine believes in, just because Donald Trump has confessed or professed, his huge faith in God. Even though we know that on the other hand, he says, no, I've never asked God for forgiveness. No use thinking about the past. That is the opposite of at least Christian teaching. One of the things about Christianity, if you're going to be one, is admitting that you're wrong and that you're flawed. And that you pray to God that you can be a better person for all these mistakes that you've made. And asking forgiveness. I know I'm a flawed person, and I hope that you'll make me a better person. That's what kind of Christian, that's like, besides number one, believing in God and worshiping Him. Number two is asking for forgiveness from God. And admitting as a human that you are flawed. That's like right there at the top of the list. Donald Trump doesn't want anything to do with it. But instead, this evangelical pastor will say, well, yeah, he's a great Christian because he points to the sky. Is that all you have to do to be a good Christian these days? Really? That's news to me. And I am hoping that would be news to a bunch of religious leaders, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Not just for Christianity, but if you just have to make one little gesture to show that, then faith really doesn't end up meaning much, does it? It's just a secret handshake, and it shows that, hey, you're good with God. Whereas another friend of mine, another guy who's a friend of mine, I'll never forget this. Way back, once again, 25 years ago, another guy that I went to college with, who I'm still friends, although I haven't talked to him recently. He always liked to remind me, and he was a guy who went to church every week, that being a good Christian, and probably in other religions too, is about faith and works. It's not just about saying you believe in God, but there has to be some motivation behind it. What work are you doing for God? And that doesn't mean going on a mission to Africa or anything, but when you talk about God and your Christianity, do you do it in the right way? That sounds to me like being closer to my idea of what being a good Christian is about than just pointing to the sky while you're talking about politics. And the funny thing is, I'm sure even probably the same pastor, being that he's a huge, it seems like he is a huge Donald Trump supporter. This might be the same guy who looked at Ted Cruz, and when Ted Cruz talked about his Christianity, think, oh, that guy's faking it. Oh, he's just saying that for effect. But a point to the sky, man, that's the most legitimate thing in the world. We are so off the tracks. See, it's when you hear this, a pastor talking about like this, I don't think that this is a one-time thing. I'm going to say that there are probably other religious leaders that think exactly like him. I'm not sure how many of them are. But this would explain why so many quote-unquote evangelicals, and to me, that grouping is still a little nebulous to me. The edges of who isn't and who is, I'm not sure. Why so many of them voted for Donald Trump in these primaries, specifically in those southern states like South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, those areas. Whereas those voters, at least going in, people thought that those would be Ted Cruz voters. Well, if these voters, these evangelicals, think that a point to the sky is enough to make a person a Christian, and a guy who actually goes out and talks about Christianity in depth, like Ted Cruz, makes you not a Christian and a faker, that's no wonder those evangelicals went for Donald Trump. I think that the answer is a little bit more in depth than that, but if some of these groups, these churches did have pastors like this saying Donald Trump's the right guy to pick, then it doesn't surprise me those evangelicals went out and did it. Unfortunately, I'd love to give you a deeper analysis than that at this point, but I'm just not sure. I don't think that all evangelicals look at the pointing to the sky and think that's a great Christian symbol and they're going to go vote for that because. I don't think. And I don't think that a lot of evangelicals looked at Ted Cruz and saw a guy who was faking his Christianity. I don't think. But the facts say otherwise. And I guess I'm going to have to just jump into this a little bit more. Now, I should say this friend of mine who brought that up is that he is not one of those people. I'm not saying that my friend is that easily fooled. He's not. This guy, astute. And like I said, he's still struggling with all of this. He still is. And I believe this guy to be a good Christian guy. He is not like that. And I'm sure that he's as confused, and he is a Ted Cruz guy, and he did not think that Ted Cruz is faking his Christianity. And had my friend, he lives in New Jersey, so they haven't even had a primary yet, but had he lived in Alabama, South Carolina, any of those states, he would have voted for Ted Cruz over Donald Trump. However, there's still that part of him that believes Donald Trump, I guess, about Trump's faith, despite all this stuff to the contrary. So you can take that for what it's worth. But in its essence, my friend of mine is still a liker of Ted Cruz. But it's all, I don't know. It's very, very confusing to me. What I would say, maybe just to theorize, is it comes down to something that I've said years ago that doesn't sit too well in certain circles. And that is this. At some point, Christianity and conservatism are going to split. Now, I'm not saying you can't be Christian and conservative, or be conservative and not be a Christian. Obviously, we know there's atheistic conservatives out there, but we know there are a lot of liberal Christians out there too. There's a wide mix of everyone. Conservatism is seen as being part of the religious right, and I've said that if conservatism were to be successful in the United States, and budgets got smaller, regulations were lifted, tax rates came down, whatever you see as being a conservative version of the United States, and it's a little tough to visualize that right now, I think that eventually there would be a split, because I'm not convinced that Christians, for the most part, are conservative necessarily at their core. I think they have some of the ideas about conservatism. Being pro-life, I think, is one of them, and that's a fine one. But I look at something like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is not conservative. It's not. It's pro-life, and everything after that is pretty socialist. Pretty socialist, as it goes with a lot of these other denominations of Christianity. Well, and I only bring up Christianity because that's the dominant religion in the United States. And I think that a lot of Christians have gotten on to the conservative bandwagon, maybe just for one issue or a couple issues. But I think that somewhere down the road, once again, if conservatism could ever be successful, is that there would be a split. That conservatism would just be seen as being a non-denominational, not atheistic, but just non-religious, but not anti-religious, which I think is what atheism is, just non-religious. It's just an ideology about how people should govern and be governed. Even though I know we get our rights from God and everything else that's said in our Constitution. But maybe this is part of that. It very well could be that a lot of these evangelicals were conservatives because they didn't have another choice. But now that Donald Trump's come along and he's not as conservative as some prior candidates and entertains some lefty positions, you know what we're going to have to start thinking? Maybe, just maybe, evangelicals aren't as conservative as we thought. And they do like some of the left-wing things that Donald Trump has said, because he definitely was not the most conservative candidate running on the Republican side, and the evangelicals still picked him instead. So he must be saying things that they like. And it has to be outside of what their religious views are of him. All right. And in fact, dare I say it, it's not evangelicals that we're just finding this out about. We're finding this out about a lot of different kinds of people this election cycle. That they're not as conservative as we thought. And more importantly, they're not as conservative as they professed. And that's why it returns to what I said last week regarding that movie Breaking Away. Everybody lies. I just didn't know. Fascinating, though. Fascinating. Going to have to take a long, hard look at that one. If we as conservatives, we got to know who our friends are going to be here through thick and thin. And it's looking to me like evangelicals are not one of those groups. One more thing before I go. I wanted to talk about Nixon versus Trump. And this is, my friend also brought this up, about Pat Buchanan saying this about Richard Nixon, is that, well, my friend said to me, maybe Trump will be like Richard Nixon. And once in a while, just say, well, what do those people want now? Meaning conservatives. Because Nixon was not conservative. His administration brought us, the EPA, OSHA, and he was not a conservative. Just not. Very much more in the Rockefeller Republican than the Ronald Reagan version. And I said this back to my friend, well, yeah, that may be true, but what did Nixon ever do for conservatives? Nothing. And it's also why I don't respect, and it was a Pat Buchanan story. It's one more reason that I don't hold Pat Buchanan in the highest regards. I'm not sure he's conservative either. So there you go. But I have to go. EdwardDentzel.com is where you can find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. You can also find them at Podbean, Podomatic, YouTube, and SoundCloud. EdwardDentzel.com/book is where you can download the first chapter of my next novel, The Comebacks. You can find me at Facebook, LinkedIn, email me, edwarddentzel@reagan.com, Twitter, Dentzel Domain. Told you about my new other show, non-political show, America's Missing Podcast. You can also find that at YouTube and Podomatic and iTunes. It's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.